Welcome to Off Center, a weekly discussion of topics that go beyond the headlines. Whether it's news, sports, or public affairs, nothing is out of bounds and everything will be off-center. Off Center is a production of the Broadcast Media Program in the Department of Communication at Austin Peay State University. Now here's your host, Christian Christensen.
Welcome into Off Center. I'm Christian Christensen alongside my co-host, Bryce Beeman, and we're excited to bring you our second episode of this show about relevant topics, whether it's local, around Tennessee, or around the world. Now, we do have a special guest coming in a little bit later today. He was actually the same man featured in last week's show, but we'll get to that a little bit later. First, we're going to roll through our big three, and we'll start with the local news. Clarksville is getting an extreme indoor trampoline park. Bryce, what do you know about it?
Yeah, Planet 3 Extreme Air Park is the name of it, and it will be located at 340 Needmore Road in Clarksville.
Yeah, well, it looks like it's pretty exciting considering that's a pretty centralized area here in Clarksville, and a lot of families really excited to bring their kids. And Clarksville Now, who reported on this, is the first to let us know, but 15,000 square feet.
Oh yeah, besides that, they're going to have a large open jump area. There's going to be a basketball dunk center, a ninja fight ladder and a course, and a trampoline dodgeball area, and there's even a place for toddlers to go.
Yeah, and it looks like it is going to bring about 30 to 40 full-time and part-time jobs here to Clarksville. So that's also a good thing when looking at the economy and the diversity that Clarksville has. So we're going to take you to our next topic, and now we're looking at a little more of an entertainment side, so somewhat political as well. Obviously, a big name, Tomi Lahren, was banned permanently from the Blaze.
Yeah, after she said that anti-abortion conservatives are considered hypocrites, and ever since she was suspended for a while, and now it's considered a ban.
Yeah, and she doesn't seem too upset about it. She's been all over Twitter and Instagram, definitely being vocal, but if anybody here has seen their final thoughts, you know that she's willing to definitely speak her mind. Now, Glenn Beck, being the conservative that he is, wasn't too happy about this either.
No, not at all. And after she said that she was pro-choice on The View, it just kind of was a very controversial topic and everything, and just the fact that she was so conservative and he's a conservative, and for her to say that, it just led it to be a suspension to a ban.
Yeah, and although it does go to show that every once in a while, it's all right to shy away from one side or the other. Now, it's tough because in this certain situation, being such a conservative network, obviously, that caused problems between the two. But we'll see how that one unfolds, and we might be able to get back to that a little bit later, depending on where she ends up. Now, going to a little more sports related, we are going to talk about the Raiders. Obviously, it's recent news and it's pretty big. They're headed to Las Vegas.
Yeah, Vegas is such a big area with all the tours and everything, and they're going to build a giant stadium, $1 billion stadium and everything. So I think that moving there, it's a big move and everything. They're hoping to get lots of fans and income and everything.
Yeah, and now we'll look at the funding a little bit later. But as for right now, obviously, Oakland being a large market, and there's other teams. There's Major League Baseball there as well. But moving to Vegas, some people are a little skeptical, and they're worried about the gambling problems. Yeah. Have you seen anything there?
Yeah, well, in the past, one of the big reasons that Las Vegas never had a team was because they thought that the players would get involved with gambling as well as trying to rig games and everything for money, and so that was a big reason. But now, since growth and all of gambling and everything, that people are starting to just become more okay with it, and so they think that it's a good place to go to Vegas.
Yeah, and so now they've also decided that, which actually this happened previously, but an NHL team is also going to end up in Las Vegas, and they're going to be called the Golden Knights. Now that is going to be an exciting process for a lot of fans around the area because Vegas has never had an NHL team before, and it is a first. So two big teams. They're also looking to bring in Major League Baseball teams, possibly an NBA, maybe a Major League Soccer, but we'll see how that one unfolds. Now let's take a look at what the mayor of Oakland had to say. She was quoted as saying that the Raider Nation is the last of the blue collar, and it's the salt of the earth fan bases, and it absolutely breaks her heart to lose the team. That's from Libby Schaaf, the mayor of Oakland, and this is obviously coming from the New York Times, so we thank them for this article. But quick question for you. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that them leaving Oakland, going to Vegas, do you think it's a good idea?
Well, coming from someone that lost their football team, it does hurt, I agree. So it's very, for the Oakland Raiders, I understand all the fans are going to be sad to lose their team, but I think it'll be interesting if they're bringing all these teams into Vegas, and it's going to be very different.
Yeah, and considering you said that you have lost a team before, let's let them know that you are from St. Louis.
Oh yeah.
And they are one of the 3 teams in the past year to at least announce or move cities, which is not something that happens often. And 31 of the 32 NFL owners actually did vote for the Raiders to move. So obviously there's not a lot of people who are against it, and it looks like the revenue will certainly be there. But like we talked about a little earlier, we do have a special guest, and when we come back, we'll finish up our interview with Phil Wood. Once again, I'm Christian Christensen alongside Bryce Beeman, and we'll be right back here on Off Center. Welcome back to Off Center. I'm Christian Christensen, and today we do have a special guest with us. It's Phil Wood. Now, Phil is known here around Austin Peay because he is an alum, but he's also a sports broadcaster of many years. Spent quite a bit of time in this business. Phil, we're thankful to have you today.
My pleasure, Christian.
Well, we do know that you're not only here for the show, but you also do some other things on campus. Tell us about it.
Well, I do. Since 2014, I've come back down as an adjunct professor in the Mass Communications Department, teaching sports broadcasting on some level. And I mean, obviously, I know most people thought, well, shouldn't you be teaching something like nuclear fission? But no, I teach sports broadcasting.
Well, I know that we are excited to have you here because you do have quite a bit of knowledge and you've been in the business for some time now. So tell us about that and what your profession is today.
Well, I got involved in broadcasting about 6 months after I graduated from Austin Peay. I got a job at WTOP Radio as a news writer. It's an all-news radio station in Washington, D.C. And right around the time I started there was a little thing going on in the District of Columbia called Watergate. And it was a great learning experience to learn the news business again, while some serious history is being made. And I guess there are some people who see, hear echoes of Watergate going on right now in Washington. But nonetheless, after being a news writer for a few years, the radio station got the rights to the Washington Capitals hockey games, and they made me the producer of the games. And I had no clue what a producer did, but I basically, by the seat of my pants, figured it out. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I got an offer to be a news writer and sports producer at another radio station in D.C., WRC, and they ended up putting me on the air. It was one of those situations where the regular host of the show, which I was usually the producer of, was going to be out of town on an assignment, and the program director of the radio station came to me and said, you're going to have to host the show on Saturday. So I went from never having hosted a show of any kind to doing a 4-hour show on a Saturday afternoon. And to make a long story short, it worked out pretty well, and I haven't been off the air since.
Well, considering obviously you've been doing it for so long now, coming back to Austin Peay, it's really exciting, but we also know that you do have a daughter that went to Austin Peay.
My daughter, Becky, graduated last May from Austin Peay with honors. She came down here having gone to a high school in Baltimore County, Maryland, and she had a lot of scholarship offers, but really what pushed her over the edge to Austin Peay was she got a personal handwritten 2-page letter from then President Tim Hall, basically telling her how much they'd like to have her come to Clarksville. She'd visited here with me. She'd eaten at Johnny's, and that I could say that pushed her over the edge. But everyone was so nice to her, and she thought most of her friends were staying in Maryland, and she thought, I've been in Maryland all my life. Let me go someplace else. So she came down here and never really looked back. She had a semester in England her junior year, spent 5 months in Europe, and very educational experience there. And then she came back here and she graduated, and right now she's doing a little bit of, I guess you'd call it freelance work for the university.
And so what was the thing that really set her over, brought her to Austin Peay versus other places up north?
Well, her dad, I came here and I majored in English and history and minored in sociology. And I guess for whatever reason, she got the impression that something good must have happened here because I ended up employed for many, many years. So I think that was part of it. But again, I also think seeing the opportunity to see another part of the country. And it didn't hurt, obviously, that friends of mine from when I was a student at Austin Peay years ago were still in Clarksville. So we kind of had several extra pairs of eyes on Becky while she was down here, just in case anything ever went wrong, and it never did. Well,
considering that she did come all the way over here, you also started on the East Coast, and what exactly brought you to Austin Peay?
Well, that's one of those bizarre kind of happenings. It was March of my senior year in high school, and I had yet to apply to a college. All of my friends had applied the previous year and been accepted, And I'd kind of let it slide, and I was playing in a rock and roll band. I was a guitar player in a band, and the keyboard player had applied and been accepted at Austin Peay, and he brought me the brochure. And the brochure back in those days folded out like a road map, and it was like an aerial view of campus. But it wasn't a photograph, it was an artist rendering. And it was beautiful. It was pastoral. It was green and lush. And I thought, gee, it's so close to Nashville. I'm a guitar player. Maybe this will work. So I applied, I was accepted, and I came down here. And again, my mother, I think, wanted me to transfer closer to home. I'd grown up in the DC area, and but I saw no reason to leave. And so I stayed here. I graduated in 4 years. I did not make the dean's list, but I did get through it in 4 years. And I kind of look at the period of time that I was in college as kind of the golden age of education in a way. Now, it was, things have changed, obviously, in terms of the technology that's involved in education, but nonetheless, the goal is the same.
Well, speaking of things changing, let's focus with just Austin Peay. Since you've been here, and even the change throughout your daughter getting here and all that, what are the changes that you've seen most here on campus?
Well, when I was here as a student, the student body was about 3,500, 3,600, and now it's over 10,000. So the campus was much smaller. The dorms, at least the men's dorms, all kind of look like 1960s vintage Holiday Inns. And so just the way the campus has expanded, certainly I think the years that Tim Hall was president were instrumental to this university really taking off. Lisa White is following in those footsteps and is doing a great deal to keep Austin Peay among the fastest growing universities in the state. So I think that the opportunities to, for instance, do what you're doing now. When I was a student, there was one journalism class taught by an English teacher who would have rather been doing almost anything other than that. And now you've got the facilities of a television station, a radio station. You can learn the business from the ground up and have a resume when you graduate from here that you've actually worked the equipment, you've actually been on camera, you've called a game, you've had any number of opportunities to put a resume together so you're not going into the world from point zero. You've got something to show people that you've actually done it before.
Yeah, and there's certainly what seemingly is unlimited opportunities here at Austin Peay when it comes to that department and the media and everything in that sense. But let's move towards the sports now on your side of things. You told us how things got started for you in the broadcasting industry, but what sports really set you ahead and which ones do you hone in on?
Well, baseball was always my best sport. Not to play. I like a lot of kids, when they hit 13, they realized they couldn't hit a curveball. But the other thing that distracted me from sports back then was rock and roll music and playing in a band. But nonetheless, getting into sports broadcasting was something I never planned to do. It happened to me. As I tell students in class, if you're lucky enough to get a job in broadcasting, you never say no when somebody says, I want you to do this, try this. Because the point is, if you don't want to do it, somebody else will. And you'll get further ahead by offering to do pretty much whatever they ask you to do, within reason, obviously. But baseball became kind of my go-to sport. I was in a town that didn't have a team in D.C. I had a major league club just up the road in Baltimore with the Orioles. But I had, I guess you could call it somewhat encyclopedic knowledge of the game. And it came in handy because when baseball came back in 2005, there weren't many local broadcasters who were prepared to broadcast baseball, to talk about baseball. It was a very football-centric town with the NFL, and we had the NHL, the NBA. Now, all those years there was no team in D.C., I was covering other sports. I covered hockey a great deal. When the Caps came to town in 1974, I had gone to Baltimore, and I had actually broadcast hockey with the Baltimore Skipjacks of the American Hockey League. And I found hockey and baseball the most compelling sports. I think part of it is the skill set required to play those sports goes so far beyond the other team sports. In football, once you sit down and you realize that in 3 hours' time, there's about 12 minutes of action. On television, obviously, you have instant replay. You see the same plays over and over again from different angles. But the actual game experience, there's just so much dead time. And basketball, again, I think it's a specialized skill. But nonetheless, it's a game that if a game ends 90-88, how do you determine what the key basket was? Was it the first basket? Was it the last basket? There's so much scoring in basketball, and with a 10-foot basket and most of the players, well over 6 feet tall, you wonder a little bit if maybe the game's gotten a little bit too easy.
Yeah. So going back on the note of Austin Peay, when you were here, did you have any idea that that would be the direction in which you would head for your future?
Christian, when I walked out of here in the summer of 1972, I was clueless as to what I was going to do with my life. I thought at one point I wanted to teach, but I never really got the education. I took some of the education courses, but not nearly enough to be certified as a teacher. I did get some early gigs as a substitute teacher back in Northern Virginia, but I mean, these were jobs that back in those days paid about $25 a day. So it was literally one of those things where you could have thoughts like this. I woke up one morning and thought, gee, I bet it'd be fun to work in the media. Now, I had written for the Allstate here, but I had not written sports. I used to write about the concerts, the rock and roll shows that would come to campus. And I was brutally critical of some of the bands, but that was just me. But it was, so I was writing news at WTOP, and they liked the way I wrote. And so I guess I thought that, well, I can do this news writing thing forever. And then suddenly I get put on the air, and that worked, and here we are now. I mean, I'm inching towards retirement, but that I've had the career I've had, I've been extremely fortunate. But it just goes to show you that even without a communications department, when I was a student at Austin Peay, my experience here had a huge impact on the person I became, based upon my ability to write, which I was aided immeasurably by being an English major here, and my grasp of baseball history, because I had so many professors here in the history department who were huge baseball fans that I used to sit around and talk baseball with. So it's just, it's almost like a happy coincidence, a confluence of events that led me into the communications field. It was not by design.
Yeah, and as you speak of writing, that's another thing that I want to kind of focus in on as well, because you are a lot of times talent. You spend a lot of time in front of the camera, just like you and I are now. We hear your voice quite often, but on the writing side of things, is that something that is still part of your career? Do you still do it, or do you focus more on your voice?
Well, I focus less on my voice. I spent a number of years as a columnist for the Washington Examiner and the Baltimore Examiner, writing general sports columns, not just baseball. I wrote for the Towson Times, which is a Baltimore County newspaper. I wrote a monthly column in a national sports collecting magazine for a number of years. I discovered that I could write very much like I speak. So I write in a very conversational style. I've been involved in a couple of books, the Rand McNally Baseball Atlas, which came out in 1992. I wrote the baseball content of that book. And then I did a book on baseball in Washington called Nationals on Parade, which was published in 2005. And I think I did that as much as anything just to get something in the Library of Congress with my name on it.
And so we will kind of move back into Washington. I mean, obviously, you gave me the opportunity to see a documentary that you were in, and it wasn't just about sports. You are involved in other things. Well,
again, it's because I was in the news business, and I was around a lot of happenings in the District of Columbia that I can certainly talk with some degree of authority about news events that happened in my lifetime. Actually, well before my lifetime as well, but in the documentaries you're talking about, which were done by WETA, the public television station in Washington, they were focusing on the decade of the 60s and the 70s, and it was one of those things that I guess a lot of the people my age from the 60s are just too burned out to remember what happened back in those days. But so yeah, that was flattering, and it's been seen all over the country now. So it's one of those things. Being able to participate in that was terrific. But I've done some other things too. I've been on ESPN, I've been on CNN, and I've done a number of other media projects that have been seen well beyond the DC area.
Yeah, and as we get a little closer to time, obviously we really enjoy having you, love to have you even longer. So we will get an opportunity to have you next week. But to finish things off, I know that you obviously spend a lot of time around baseball. I want to ask you personally, what do you think about Austin Peay's baseball team this spring?
Well, I think, first of all, Travis Jansen has done a remarkable job given how late he got the job last year. He was hired in September and went on to win 34 games last year, which was remarkable. But I think the time I've spent around the team, they clearly are buying into what he's selling, and this is one of the premier baseball programs in the country. They get players drafted every single year. So I think the Austin Peay baseball program is in great hands right now.
Well, Phil, we thank you very much for having you. And once again, I'm Christian Christensen alongside Phil Woods. Stay tuned for next week. We'll have another opportunity to talk to Phil and pick his brain a little bit more. We'll be right back here on Off Center. And welcome back to Off Center. Once again, Christian Christensen alongside Bryce Beamond, and really exciting that we got to talk to Phil Wood. He's definitely somebody that's pretty knowledgeable, and we did get a chance to talk to him last week. But Bryce, this is arguably one of the more exciting parts of our show, and it's currently leaving. And this is the segment, if you haven't already heard, considering it is our second episode, this is the segment where we'll get a little controversial. And Bryce and I will go back and forth about a topic that is certainly out in the open and that a lot of newsreels have gone over multiple times. And this one today is the bathroom bill. And a lot of people have heard of that one. It's also known as HB2. In North Carolina today, obviously Fox News has given us this one, but multiple news accounts on this one specifically. Yes. What have you learned about it?
Well, it's apparently going to cost them about $3.76 billion, first of all. That's what everyone is saying. And people are kind of concerned because they're saying that they don't have the money for it right at this point. But then other people are also saying that they do have the money for it, or that it's worth it to have this bathroom bill.
Yeah, and when you look at what it actually does, it requires transgender people to end up using restrooms that correspond to the sex that is on their birth certificate. Now that can cause serious issues with transgenders and things like that, but those who are for it are trying to say that, well, we're trying to think along the terms of, children and how that can affect them. So there's definitely two sides to this story, but when it gets to financials, I mean, there are also sports teams involved in a lot of different sports companies that are staying out of North Carolina.
Yeah, I have to agree. Just the fact that they're trying to make it for health reasons and everything and just safety purposes, but it is such a big area, just a big topic to talk on. Like, there's just lots of issues with this, and they don't want sexual predators or people trying to take advantage of everything in the bathrooms.
Yeah, absolutely, and that could cause problems, especially when you're talking about a man and his daughter, or
yes.
A woman and her younger son, and just depending on who you see walking in and out. Obviously, short time spent, but it's enough to cause an impact. So, what are your thoughts on the bill? I mean, not necessarily agree or disagree, but overall thoughts.
Well, I am a little torn with it. I think it's a good idea. I think that they are trying to do it in a way to help people and everything. I don't think they're trying to be offensive or anything with that. I think they are just trying to make it for safety purposes and try not to step on anyone's toes. But the big issue is if they even have enough money for it and everything. It's going to cost a lot to try to do this, and if they're already struggling with money and everything, is it worth it, kind of thing? That's where I'm kind of at.
Yeah, and North Carolina obviously being a large market, a big economy,
yes.
And so their main problem is it's not so much that it will cost them with the initial bill, it's the people who are staying out of the state. And those include companies such as PayPal and Ringo Starr and the NCAA, who's a favored host when it comes to certain sporting events. And I mean, you look at the NFL, who's been coming out and saying, you know what, we will not participate in things in your state if you do not pass certain
yes.
bills, which is somewhat contradictory considering the NFL has had a few issues of their own. You look at the many sexual assault cases in which NFL players have been let off the hook.
Yes.
And so it's very, very touchy for a lot of people. But as we look further in, the jobs, I mean, overall, they are supposed to miss out on 2,900 jobs.
Yeah.
And so when we look at this, do you think that the 2,900 jobs will be made up for by the moral standards that they're making this bill for, or do you think that that's something they should really reconsider?
Well, that is a big thing. We don't need to get rid of people's jobs and everything. That's such a big deal, but I still see how they're trying to go about this, but it's such a torn. I guess that's why everyone's having such a big controversy with it, because I'm even torn myself about it.
Absolutely. And reading into the depths of this story, it's really tough to figure out which side, because you have multiple job centers, multiple companies coming in and out of North Carolina. And when you look at the major sporting events, such as Super Bowls and the NCAA March Madness and different things like that, when they go to schedule, a lot of them are just crossing North Carolina right off the list.
Yeah.
And so, not quite sure how that one will unfold long term, but we'll continue to keep up with that story and possibly get back once again. This one's reported from Fox News. But Bryce, it's been exciting. Second episode, not too bad.
Yeah, it's been okay.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to do a little more depending on how things unfold.
Yes.
And maybe we'll get to more topics later on once we get a little more time involved. But it was really great to hear from Phil Wood once again. And second episode was really well. So that'll be all for currently leaving. And Off Center as a whole, second episode down, and hopefully many more to come. Once again, Christian Christensen alongside Bryce Beament. Really excited for this one, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Thanks for joining us for this week's edition of Off Center with your host, Christian Christensen. Off Center is a production of the Broadcast Media Program in the Department of Communication at Austin Peay State University and recorded in the studios of WAPX-FM. We invite you to tune in again next week for another edition of Off Center on Gubs TV and Clarksville's 91.9 FM.